spike-like projections on the surface, which gives the overall virus an appearance of a crown, hence coronavirus. As you can see, most of it presents as an upper respiratory illness. Some of it translates into what we call SARI, severe acute respiratory illness. Am I audible to everyone?
Yes, you are audible.
All right.
Yeah.
So most of it is mild to moderate disease which resolves by itself. A small proportion of disease is typically characterized by an over-exuberant and unregulated immune response, which gathers a lot of pro-inflammatory cells, leads to a cascade of cytokines being released, which cause systemic inflammatory symptoms, which gives rise to ARDS and shock, and the patient succumb thereof. So essentially, it's an unholy trinity. So if you see, there is infection, there is inflammation, and there is immunity. When it is regulated immunity, you have neutralizing antibodies, which recruit macrophages and neutralize the virus and clear it from the system. When you have ineffective immunity, you have an over-exuberant immune response. You have a CD4 suppression and a CD8 predominant response, which leads to a cascade of cytokines being released, which gives rise to something like a SIRS, a systemic inflammatory response syndrome, and an ARDS like picture, which gives rise to sepsis, respiratory failure, and death. So, this is essentially the trimeric spike protein of the virus, which essentially interacts with ACE2, the acetylcholine esterase, angiotensin converting enzyme 2 moiety on the cell. It requires a serine protease for activation, whereby it enters the cell. And these steps essentially are where we can explore therapeutic options, neutralizing antibodies onto the virus directly, blockage of the protease, recruitment of effector CD8 positive T cells, which are consequence of vaccination, which cause direct cytotoxicity. And something which is a little unconventional is filtration of the cytokines from the blood to reduce the severity of the cytokine storm. Now, the next topic, which is essentially the crux of today's session, is COVID and cancer morbidity and mortality. How do COVID and cancer interact? So very early evidence came from this paper in Cancer Discovery, where what they saw was there was definitely an increased mortality with COVID. If you see over here, the COVID-19 patient without cancer and the COVID-19 patient with cancer, you see a more protracted course of illness. You see a lot more of these red lines, which are ICU admissions, and you see a lot of severe symptoms. Moreover, what is very important here, what they saw was lung cancers, hematological malignancies, metastatic malignancies. These patients were far more severely affected. Hematological malignancies because there is impaired immune function. Lung cancer because probably smokers have a very damaged lung microenvironment and their lungs are pre-existingly compromised majorly prior to the insult by COVID. And metastatic cancers because probably there's an element of systemic inflammatory recruitment there already to begin with. Now, if we look here among the various modalities, what they noticed was cytotoxic chemotherapy and immunotherapy seemed to be suffering the worst. What they surmised was, especially with immunotherapy, that there is recruitment of inflammatory cells and this sort of worsens the overall cascade. What is germane to our discussion today is, if you see, radiotherapy features in a very favorable manner in all of these places, whether it is invasive ventilation, whether it is severe or critical patients, ICU admissions or death. Patients on radiotherapy are affected to a much lesser extent. than other modalities. And that becomes much more clearer on this graph. If you see radiotherapy is right here, and for example, immunotherapy is right there. So this was early evidence which was put out there. Okay. So 3 important statements over here, like I have mentioned. What is important to know, the second thing which I pointed out in green, the non-metastatic cancer experience similar frequencies of severe conditions to those observed in patients without cancer. This is one important point which we need to remember. Next comes this data published in the Lancet from 9 centers. If you see, again, cancer patients are definitely doing worse. The same patterns are repeated here. Hematological malignancies are doing worse. And what you will also see is patients with poorer performance status are patients who are more susceptible. Also, what they saw was patients who received chemotherapy within 4 weeks before symptom onset and male sex were doing worse. So 4 weeks, that cutoff and immunotherapy and chemotherapy within that time probably predisposes you to more myelosuppression and a greater chance of getting the virus per se. Whereas this male sex probably has a lot to do with smoking, the difference in the immune systems, the difference in the endocrine systems. Also the fact that serine protease I was talking about, to some degree its activity is modulated by the androgen receptor. So there are multiple uh, features leading to increased mortality in males. So essentially what we find out over here is similar symptoms. Patients who have received chemotherapy, they do worse. Overall cancer patients are doing worse. So what are the determinants of severity? Another paper published in the Lancet. Essentially what you can see here is the same thing, the advanced tumor stage, overall a pro-inflammatory phenotype. You see interleukin 6 there, you see procalcitonin there, NTBP, you see reduced T4, CD4, increased CD8. Essentially a pro-inflammatory phenotype is what is leading these patients to do a lot worse. So this is probably a direct reflection of that unholy trinity I was talking about earlier. And what is important is severity of symptoms is definitely more among these patients. Okay, so that's the take home point from here. Now, what are the determinants of mortality? Now we move to the next step. We've said that patients get more COVID, are likely to have worse disease. And now the third point is they are likely to die. So which are the patients who die? Older patients, patients with D dimer levels, which are higher. And if you see, look at this column over here, high D dimer, high IL-6, high ferritin, high troponin, and lactate dehydrogenase. Essentially, again, that pro-inflammatory phenotype again being demonstrated here. So essentially, older patients, advanced cancers, poorer general status, and essentially a pro-inflammatory phenotype. Basically, the SOFA score is basically something which quantifies that. So we need to remember these things in hand. Now, if we meta-analyze this early data, definitely there is a clear shift towards increased mortality, which actually comes across even more properly when we look at these two further studies. So this actually is from the UK group. So we know cancer patients have more mortality. Therefore, the question arises, should we stop treating these patients? There are nuances to this. Even this paper suggested increased mortality. However, sitting where we are in India, we should take a look at this. The majority of our cancer patients are not here. The majority of our cancer patients are here. So you see the relation to excess mortality is actually lesser. Again, as this audience is primarily radiotherapy, I would ask you to look here. So you see, radiotherapy is sort of like the go-to treatment in these times when things like chemotherapy are faring much worse. Again, now if we talk about surgery, there is one thing to remember, because surgery is usually the direct alternative to radiotherapy in most of these cases. Cancer surgery per se is associated with an increased risk of mortality, especially 30-day mortality. This is something which we need to remember. So we have a young population of patients with cancer whose excess mortality may be within acceptable limits. So one naturally surmises that we should treat these patients. How do we treat these patients? We should choose wisely. We need to choose people with lesser comorbidities. We need to select the kind of malignancies we are treating. Highly locally advanced malignancies, metastatic malignancies, they don't really merit such aggressive treatment in this time. So essentially, what I'm trying to put across is we have to treat, but we have to treat wisely. This was the definitive aspect of treatment. Now, how do we palliate in this era? As soon as we are saying that patients are at increased risk of death and morbidity, palliation becomes very important. So there is a definite role of early palliation in this setting. So if you can see, this is a very beautifully demonstrated pyramid for priority in palliation. So the highest priority is given to patients who are at an imminent risk of mortality and very impaired quality of life. After that, you have patients who are more curable. Now, overall, on top of this, what is the background impact we are expecting in cancer? There is going to be reduced diagnosis and screening. This has already been demonstrated in data from Holland. It does not mean that cancer is going down. It is meaning that all of our diagnoses are likely to get postponed. We will get more advanced cases. This is a figure which has been modeled. 51,000 surgeries postponed in the last 12 weeks. There will be definite social and financial consequences. Therefore, we need to provide our cancer care and we need to manage COVID. There is no way out, because you need to realize that the most common cancers in this country will have 100% mortality if you don't treat them. COVID at worst will have 13 to 27%. It's a very clear figure. You need to keep that in mind. You need to treat, but how should you treat is the nuanced question. Now, when you are a cancer facility and you are assaulted with this new pandemic, and let's say you are a high throughput center treating, let's say in our case, 70,000 odd new patients in a year, what do? You need a plan. So what did we do? We formed an action group with senior experienced people. We mitigated our treatments. We reduced the number of complex surgeries. For radiotherapy, we shifted slowly to hypofractionation. We avoided radiotherapy and delayed radiotherapy whenever possible. Myelosuppressive multi-agent chemotherapy was curtailed. This was towards cancer care. Towards patient care, we established screening OPDs outside the hospital, where we used the CDC questionnaire. Patients reporting COVID-associated symptoms were sent to a fever OPD, where they were screened, made to wait, swabbed. And we also segregated areas of the hospital where we would isolate and keep these patients. One more thing which we need to remember is no hospital can function without a proper workforce. So you need to protect your employees as well. You need to protect your high-risk employees. You divide your workforce, you use them optimally so that you always have bench strength. And you facilitate people coming and going to the hospital. So overall, it is a holistic response that you need to tackle optimal treatment of cancer under these conditions. Now, while treating COVID, as physicians, you have to protect yourself. What are the analogies which we can draw from radiotherapy? So we have always known time, distance, and shielding. You reduce your time of contact or completely avoid it if possible. You use telemedicine, you use virtual tumor boards. You use alternative scheduling of chemotherapy. You explore altered fractionation. Distance. You enforce social distancing among your patients. You segregate your high risk individuals, optimize your workforce, and practicing what I am preaching right now, you do online academics. And then when you come to shielding, of course, your personal protective equipment. Now, how effective is this likely to be? This is beautifully shown in this meta-analysis published in Lancet. This is the impact of distance. Look at what happens when you increase your distance of contact to 1 meter or more. Your risks go crashing down. Now, when you add this on to the impact of using a mask, preferably an N95 respirator, you see that you can bring down the odds ratio even more. So if you actually see over here, there's a relative risk of 2.02 per meter, it goes down. And the face mask reduces it further. And better, on top of that, if you have eye protection, even better. So you first, so far, you know that your patients are going to be at an increased risk. You yourself are at an increased risk. So accordingly, you mitigate for your patients, you mitigate for yourself, and therefore you are ready to go ahead. Now there are umpteen guidelines. We are publishing at a rate which is quite phenomenal. What is going to happen as a consequence of these publications is something which is open to debate. So before I go further, I will just recap the levels and grades of recommendation because it is important to know it in the context of whatever evidence has become available. So just take a look at this, keep it in your heads, because what we will see next is essentially we have low level evidence for guidelines for radiotherapy and multidisciplinary care. It is all level 2 and below, grade B, C, D and below. Now, if you look at all the guidelines which have been published, whether it is ASTRO, ISTRO, whether it is ESMO, whether it is ASCO, whether it is the RCR guideline, whether it is our guidelines, it will be very tedious for you guys to actually go and look through all of them. So I've summarized the basic principles over here. What is most important, I have highlighted in red. You have to consider the fact that the epidemic may overwhelm your facilities. You have to consider the fact that you will run short of PPE. You have to look at patient age because almost a 9-fold increase in mortality with people who are 80 and above. You have to look at potential for cure. You have to look at performance status and ability to actually withstand your cancer treatments. Prioritize your curative cases. Save the aggressive surgery, the CTRT and the normofractionation for them. Use neoadjuvant and mitigating therapies as much as possible, which are less toxic, such as hormonal therapy, pre-op RT, or even watchful waiting. Cautiously use aggressive polychemotherapy in the NACT and CTRT setting because myelosuppression and increased mucosal toxicity is not going to do much good to your patients. And this is definitely a time where you don't want your patients metabolically and nutritionally compromised. And you optimally use hypofractionation. Optimal is the important word. There will be an increased usage as resources get more and more constrained. Therefore, the temptation to use extreme hypofractionation will be extreme also. What is important is we do not go overboard. One classical example, you do not go and do extreme hypofractionation, let's say in a case of like a post-op lung or even moderate hypofractionation. You don't go and do an extreme hypo in case of, let's say, a brain tumor, a primary brain tumor, without taking due recourse to whether this patient can be treated by normal methods. You mitigate and delay invasive interventions and prolong treatments for low grade or benign tumors. If you have a pituitary adenoma, postpone the treatment by 6 months. There's no problem. If you have a small AVM which requires radiosurgery, postpone by 3 months. What is important is also you need to take care of your patients. Aggressive and early nutritional interventions because poor nutrition is going to drive their immunity down. palliative and supportive care alone should be explored as an option in the frail and the elderly. And this has been shown both by consensus and mathematical modeling. One more important thing is you have to take local relevance into account when giving these guidelines. You open Astro Istro today, they will tell you to wait 8 weeks for a locally advanced head neck cancer. It is okay for them. You have to realize their locally advanced head neck and our locally advanced head neck is not the same. They will say their highest priority is HPV positive oropharyngeal cancer. We hardly ever see it in practice. Maybe 100 patients, you will see one. So you need to put things in context, and whenever possible, try and refer to intelligent local guidelines. Now, I have just cited the NICE guidelines here as an example because NICE is quite pragmatic because it is driven by government funding and they have to give a lot of explanations. If you see very clearly, their highest priority is also of curative intent in a category 1 rapidly proliferating tumor. And next is urgent palliation, let's say for a malignant spinal cord compression. And lesser aggressive tumors, you can safely postpone radiotherapy. Post-operative radiotherapy with clear margins, you can safely postpone radiotherapy. Palliative radiotherapy, where it is not very urgent. Let's say somebody has a chronic low-grade pain for a bone met, which is not associated with soft tissues in a non-weight-bearing area, for example. You can palliate these symptoms without taking recourse to radiotherapy. And the lowest priority is for adjuvant radiotherapy if the disease has been completely resected and there is a less than 20% risk of local recurrence at 10 years. Again, what I mentioned earlier, taking local circumstances into consideration. It will be very doubtful how many cases in practice you're going to see where there will be resected disease with less than 20% risk of local recurrence. So always remember to take local circumstances into cognizance. Now, what happens when we go to brachytherapy? It is on similar lines. If you see radical brachytherapy for highly curative lesions, do not postpone. Locally advanced cervix, something which you can still cure and get 50% survival at 5 years, do not postpone. Everything else essentially can be postponed. Again, these are not the category 1 tumors. So as you go down, you can easily see that these procedures can be safely postponed and obviated. Then it is safe to do so. And especially in palliative settings as of today, where there is a risk of aerosol generating procedures classically, let's say an esophagus or a bronchus, you should try and omit these cases as of today. Again, where you can easily do external beam, omit. Classical example is keloid. So basically prioritize early cancers, curative cancers, or urgent palliative cancers. Everything else can come lower down the scale. Now, of course, we are talking about going for hypofractionation. Of course, there will be a counterpoint saying, is this the place where SRS steps in and takes over? No. Almost all cases of SRS are actually priority 2 to 4 as per NICE. You defer treatment for benign lesions. If you have small lesions, do a single fraction SRS. Fractionated SRS comes as a lower priority. And also in situations where surgical intervention is likely to lead to exposure, you do single fraction radiotherapy if possible and finish it off. So everything there is, you be pragmatic and you be cautious at every step. Now, one more important population which needs to be addressed in terms of COVID is geriatric patients, because these are the ones at the highest risk. So actually, you need to assess your geriatric patients, and these are various tools available to see how fit they are for treatment and what are the prospective outcomes that you can expect with your patient. Because if you see a lot of these scales, if you have very poor scores, then your patients may actually not benefit for treatment. So again, if you take such patients, the highest priority has to be given to patients with imminent risk of early mortality and curative treatments. So patients who are at both ends of absolute both ends of the spectrum, you treat them. Everything else is either intermediate or low, where there are modest benefits for survival at the cost of a high risk of acquiring COVID, or the symptoms that you are trying to palliate are actually very mild or will not palliate despite your best efforts. That is where you call it a day and do supportive care and holistic care alone. That is very important. Now, have we been doing the right thing prior to this? So we just concluded a survey which has been just accepted in clinical oncology, and it is good to know that we have. So essentially, these are the patterns of care which we have demonstrated in a survey. Most people agree that in an untested symptomatic patient, we test. In a positive test, we defer treatment till negative. In an untested asymptomatic patient, you go ahead with a category 1 tumor and you treat. Category 2 and 3, you safely delay RT. Now, 2 or 3 other cases which we need to point out. So one is cleanliness of surfaces. So what is actually recommended is 2 or 3 times a day, high intensity cleaning with something like hypo. Second thing is protection for patient, for treatment givers on the console. If you can do PPE, great, but at least my personal experience with PPE is that it is very, very uncomfortable to keep on. What would suffice probably is a N95 with a surgical mask, a face shield, and a gown. Gloves are also optional. What is important, most important, is you maintain your distance. You don't take your mask and your face shield off. You hand sanitize after every interaction. Even when you pick up somebody's document, you sanitize before and after. You make sure that you are careful in interacting with patients and they have masks on for as much time as possible. And the next thing is, any symptoms, get tested at the earliest. This is how you keep yourself safe. This is how you keep other people safe. And by this, I would like to conclude, and my sincere acknowledgements to Sharbani Madam, who is basically leading our departmental response to COVID and is doing a phenomenal job. Thank you very much.